Greetings and welcome. My name is Mike Bankhead. I am your host. I am a bass player and songwriter from the Gem City, Dayton, Ohio. This is episode 112, and my guest on this episode is Anthony Church, a fellow Ohioan, a producer, a podcaster, and an all around lovely individual. We had this chat a long time ago, but I'm just now getting it up on the You Could Be My Aramis podcast. Yeah, the delay is all on me. It's my fault. But you know what? I think it might have been worth the wait. You're going to really enjoy this conversation. Anthony is a fine and interesting gentleman. Well, let's get to it. I just forgot what day it was. It's Monday. Happy Monday, Anthony.
Yeah, happy Monday to you too, man.
So let's start off by having you introduce yourself to the listeners. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Anthony Church. I'm a music producer and a podcast host out of Northeast Ohio. I live about 20 minutes from a town called Canton, Ohio, where the Pro Football Hall of Fame is and a bunch of other stuff is there, if anyone knows that. But I began producing in 2016, so I'm about 7 years in now as a music maker. And then my podcast, I had been doing that with a friend beforehand from like 2018 up until the pandemic. And then around 2020, during that time, I kind of reassessed everything and I wanted to have something that was focused more on music and specifically interviewing artists, kind of like what you do with your show, Mike. So I kind of just made the decision to move forward, and it's called the Proven Knowledge Podcast. I've been doing it every week now for the last 3 years. This past month in May was actually 3 years exact since I began the show. Um,
Congratulations.
yeah,
Not a
I
lot of podcasts left
appreciate
that
it.
long.
I was gonna say, and just to be able to do it consistently and have people, want to be on the show. And this year specifically, I've been getting hit up more and more about people wanting to be on without me even having to reach out, which is super awesome. And it goes to show that people are actually paying attention to what's going on. And other than that, just, continuing my journey as a musician and just meeting new artists, working mostly remotely. Since I still don't live in a big area with a lot of artists, I still work with my artists who I started out with, but for the most part, it's just been, reaching out on Instagram, emails, Twitter, all those sorts of things to get in touch with different artists. And I've been blessed to work with, I believe I'm over 25 independent artists now, and still growing. So that's super awesome. And then, yeah, we're about 160 some episodes into the podcast too. So a lot of cool stuff. And I'm just happy to be doing, what I love, even though it's not full time yet. Just putting in those steps every day to make it continue to grow. And hopefully one day I can do this, as my sole thing. So it's super awesome.
It's cool to see other folks putting the work in because they love it, right?
Hmm.
Now, since you do a lot of things, we have a lot to unpack. I'm going to start with the music stuff. You started by saying that you're a producer. Now, due to the difference in our generation, that word doesn't mean the same thing to
Hmm.
you or people younger than me than it does to me. In my generation and in the genres of music that I generally consume, producers don't generally play anything. They are the people that I would compare them to an project manager. This is because they spent 17 years in corporate IT, so I'm used to that jargon. But they're the people who make the ultimate decisions that help the artists in order to bring out the best in the songs. But they're like the project director person.
Hmm.
That is not what you mean when you say producer. So when you say producer, Anthony, what does that mean? Let's get that clear for old people like me.
Yeah. So I love that you just said that because I do feel like where we are now, especially, there's so many different ways to be a producer or like different roles to play as a producer. So for me, it really just goes based on, who I'm working with specifically, because some artists, they like to have the vision themselves and they just like the full control over what they're doing. They might just need an instrumental from me or something like that. And I might be totally hands off with the process. Other times I'm working directly with the artist and they want my input. They want to know, should we move chorus here? Should we put like an intro? Should we add things in? Um, so then, I'm more hands-on with something like that where I'm kind of directing them and guiding them where they want to go. So I'm always just flexible as far as what the artist wants to do. For me, it's just about the artist trying to get, their vision across um, at the end of the day and just reach the sound that they're looking for. Because I think that, artists appreciate that, especially when they don't know the terminology or they don't know kind of how to get from point A to point B. And if they feel like you can get them there, why wouldn't you want to do that? But I also don't like to overstep and try to do too much and feel like, if the artist has the vision already mapped out and they know what they're doing, I'm going to give them the reins to do it. You know what I mean? I'll just be here kind of playing the background if they need something. Um, with my artist, because we started together. So like when I decided to make the instrumentals and stuff, he was gonna rap. So I think having that originally, be able to have someone there to work with and learn from, and learn how to record an artist, learn how to structure the beat, learn how to just craft an album, sequencing, all that sort of thing. That helped me a lot initially just to be able to work with different people now because I can take some of the tips I learned then and be like, okay, I can apply them here in this way. But every individual is totally different. That's definitely what I found. It's not like I don't know if I could ever take one instance and like apply it to every single artist I've worked with, but it's just adapting as you go. And I feel like I'm just going to continue to get better at that. I still feel like I have a lot of work to do. But it's just kind of learning every day and learning from different people and kind of taking the mental notes for me to just get better and even put myself in a good position to start with so that there's not a ton of things that I have to backtrack and do later on. It's like if I come as prepared as I can, chances are the artist is going to meet me right in the middle and we're just going to make something great. So to me, that's what being a producer is. It could be a range of different things. And I just kind of try to play my role wherever I can. So,
I like that. You shared with me a playlist of a whole lot of songs that you've produced, and I actually have questions on. We're going to get into some of the details of what you were just talking about how you
mhm.
approach different projects. First, you're also an artist because of some of these, you are the only name on the track. So, how do you approach production or putting a song together, building a song when your name is the one that's going to be on it and there's going to be no other names?
Mhm. This might sound very strange, but honestly, I approach it very nonchalantly and just kind of like without any pressure, which is weird because it's just, I'll just make, usually I make instrumentals every day. I try to do two or three ideas a day, even if I know they might not ever be used for anything. So when I'm putting together like so far with when it's just me, it's just instrumental albums and EPs and things like that and crafting different projects. Um, so I just kind of take something that feels right and just kind of sequence everything together. Like if let's say I make an EP, and it has a certain theme to it, I just take four or five different things I have probably already done, and I'll just put them together and try to sequence them out. It's very like quick, and I'm just like, okay, let's put this together. Let's do this. This feels right to me. All right. I don't have to seek approval from anyone else. I can just do it myself. I don't even get those like fully mixed and mastered. I kind of put them out the way that they are like naturally because I'll mix them as good as I can. But when it's just me involved, it's just like I just kind of go with the flow and just start putting things out. And I decided around 2020 to begin releasing music on my own, and doing a lot of instrumental stuff. I think it's just when someone else is involved, then it's like you kind of got to go through a lot more steps and kind of, we have to be on the same page about things. For me, I guess I do. So I don't want to say like I don't take it seriously as far as like putting things out there and wanting it to be great. It's just I approach it much more carefree than I think a lot of people would. And as long as I feel good about it at the time, I'm like, okay, let's do that. Now we're going to move on to the next thing. So I'm very much about just on to the next thing. Let's just keep this energy going. So that's kind of like what the process has been like. And I got another project coming out in July. It's a new solo instrumental EP again. So gonna be the same thing with that.
What instruments do you play?
I used to play guitar, so I'm kind of mild with guitar. I still want to pick that up fully and get better at it because I took lessons when I was a kid. And it didn't last long because I didn't have the patience for it. I think I was just too young at the time. I've really wanted to learn piano. I know that it's one of the more difficult ones to learn. So just trying to like ease my way into that. Everything else has been pretty much just going off of ear, and just piecing things together where I can, using programming, using MIDI, all those sort of things. So I think just taking my time with that to get better, um, is kind of where I'm at with instruments and everything. But guitar is really like high on my list. I think if I can get good at that, especially since I'm leaning a lot more in towards like R&B and soul right now, I'm trying to do a lot more of those styles. I think that would take things like up a notch if I could really get at least decent at some chord progressions and just figure out the basics, to start crafting some new stuff. So hopefully that is in the near future.
When you sit down to write, what's the first tool that you reach for?
Um, Honestly, it's probably just my sound library, which I usually just stock with different like samples and different ideas to kind of have a base. I always start with melodies. So I usually don't ever start with the drums. Like I'll pull up FL Studio is the DAW that I use. So I always go to FL Studio. I use a plugin called SliceX, which you can kind of just drag any sample into and just chop it up as you would. So I always start with a melody. It's usually a piano or, like I said, a guitar, maybe some bells, just to kind of get a bass going. And then I start building around it. So I'll just match it with the keys and then find the right drums. Usually it's usually 45 minutes the max of what I'm doing on a single idea. Like I don't like to sit there for 3 or 4 hours and work on the same thing. My brain capacity would probably be fried at that point. So I kind of just gotta, do it and then I might come back to it later on. But just to get the initial idea, that's kind of how it goes. Um, but yeah, the first thing I reach for is probably just let's find, a base to get started with, and then we can kind of build around that.
All right. So these next questions are going to be specific based on some of the things I noticed in the playlist that you sent me. And by the way, dear listeners, this is going to be linked to in the show notes and also in the show description. So if you want to hear a whole lot of music that came out of Anthony Church, either by himself or collaborations, all you got to do is click on the link. Let me find it. The first song that I wanted to ask about is by Cherry Luna, and it's called He Loves It. So this is pretty early in the playlist. That's a pretty sparse arrangement. And I'm listening to it, and it was the kind of song that I thought, oh, I could hear this with only an acoustic guitar, only a piano. So I'm curious, how did that artist bring the song to you? And how did you go about deciding on what sounds to put around it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting scenario right there. So actually, it was an EP called Blood Red, and I actually met her. Like I got in touch with her around the time when I started the podcast, and we just started talking back and forth. And she let me know that she was a producer as well. So she does everything. She writes, produces, sings, does it all. She's one of the most talented musical individuals I've ever met. So we kind of came up with an idea where I just send small ideas back and forth and we just kind of produce it together. So the production you hear on there is also co-produced by her as well. So that's why it has a much different feel from if you've heard a lot of just my solo stuff. It's got more of like synth pop and like bubblegum pop in there and even some like EDM influences. Um, so it's much different than anything that I've done before. And I think just that whole process in general was just kind of my first time working with someone like that. So it was really just sending, like I would find like riffs, either just very small loops or things like that that I had laying around, and I would give them to her, and she'd flesh them out into these full ideas. And she works pretty quick too, kind of like me, which is baffling because she does so much. She layers so much with the production as well, and even the vocals. So I just remember being blown away. I think He Loves It was probably the third or fourth song we did, because we did two singles for the EP. One was called Cosmic Love, and the other was called Hold On. And so He Loves It was probably like third or fourth that we did. But I got to give her a lot of credit for that song because she really had the vision for a lot of those things, and she would just hit me back for feedback every time. I was always just blown away. I'm like, you got this. Like you are taking this to the next level. Um, So even now, like we're still working on stuff behind the scenes. We've done a few more collaborations and we're working on another project as well. It's going to kind of be a bigger project, but the process with her is really just it'll start something simple with what I did. It could just be a little song or maybe a couple different tracks that I have laying around. And she's able to just take that and flip it into something totally different and fresh. And so He Loves It was definitely one of those instances. And it was when we first started working, which is around 3 years ago now. So shout out to Cherry Luna. She is incredible. And definitely check out her solo work too. She does a lot of cool stuff. So
That's good. It's always nice to be able to introduce folks to other independent musicians that we respect, right?
absolutely.
You also work with a handful of rappers, well, more than a handful. I'm thinking Jay Trey's got several tracks on here. DP. What does the creative process look like when a rapper comes to you and wants to do an EP or an album?
hmm
What are they bringing you, and how does that work? And I really have no idea because this is not. I enjoy listening to rap more so the stuff from the 80s and 90s because I'm old.
Yeah.
Uh, but I don't think there's any rap that's going to be as good as the stuff from the late 80s and early 90s. There's just not. Uh, but that's an art form that I play an instrument and I write songs on instruments. I
Mhm.
don't know how I would build a song around just lyrics. Like even if I write lyrics, I'm going to sit down at the piano and go look for chords immediately. Like
Yeah.
that's the first thing
Yeah.
I think of. I'm assuming that's probably not how it works when you're working with the rapper. So can you fill us old folks in on how you build the albums that way?
Yeah. So I think always in hip hop, at least, yeah, for since the digital age kind of made its turn, I think it's always kind of been that way where rappers are kind of just in search of the sound that they're looking. They don't really know what they're looking for because, like I said earlier about the terminology thing, they might not know every little like nuance of what things are called. So if they come to me or like we've already connected, they'll just give me examples like references, like a certain sound of an artist that they enjoy, and they're like, I'm looking for something like this. So I'll go and I'll see if I already have something like that laying around. But if not, I'll just start kind of making things around the reference track. And I'll probably just get a folder of what I like to do is I get folders of ideas going for an artist specifically. So I probably put like 10 or 15 ideas in there. And then I'll just start sending them over. Um, and then from there, I'll just get the feedback. I'm feeling this one. I'm not really feeling this one. So I start gravitating more towards the ones that they're enjoying. Um, and then again, that kind of just depends on the specific person on their process. Some people, they could write a hook in 5 minutes, you know what I mean? And then they could just do the verses and be done. Other people like to spend a month or two on one song just to kind of get it where it needs to be. So from there, it's kind of depending on, if you're working closely with them or not, it's kind of out of your hands. You're just sending and, kind of just getting feedback and keeping in touch with them. I might reach back out and say, "Hey, how's it going? Is the process going good? Do you need anything from me at this time?" I think just for hip hop in general, it kind of just always starts with, they might have some lyrics, but they don't have a direction as far as the sound goes. Um, so I have to kind of start moving that where it needs to be. That's kind of like one of the responsibilities, I guess. But it's always just like sending out instrumentals and just kind of seeing where you can get back. And I still do that to this day. I've done that since I started. The ideas I make every day, I might say, okay, this sounds like something that this artist is going to enjoy. So I'm going to put this in their folder to send them tonight. So I always make them and I send them out. If I'm not posting them on like BeatStars or YouTube or something like that, if I know they're gonna work with someone specifically and there's a chance they might enjoy it, I'll just send it to them. And I've had songs get placed like that. You just don't know. You know what I mean? You kind of just gotta go from there. But yeah, if you're working like from the ground up, I think it's more about just having the conversations first and then we'll just start building from scratch. But there's just so many different ways to go about it. But I definitely see what you're saying about the genre specifically, because I do always believe that it's been driven by, just kind of having these existing ideas. And then if a rapper hears it, they're going to catch that inspiration and go from there. And you might just have to tweak a couple things, but that's kind of how I view it too.
So on projects where you're building the sounds from scratch or providing the lyricist, the artist, the rapper, a rhythmic bed for the rhymes, or working, as you mentioned earlier, working with an artist on arranging the song, moving this chorus here, editing this part. I'm curious from a business standpoint what that looks like on your songwriting and publishing splits. Do you get songwriting credit for that kind of work and publishing credit for that kind of work?
Yeah. So I had to, in the last few months, I went back and I redid a lot of the things with my initial rates for like the licensing fees and stuff like that. So the way it is now is where, depending on what license fee they get initially, we'll be able to work out those things in the back end as far as the royalties, mechanicals, and the publishing and all that stuff. So kind of the way that I work it at least is, the higher you pay, I'm more willing to negotiate a lower percentage of, the publishing, things like that. If you're going with that lower amount to begin with, I might want, 50% or more. It just depends, but I'm always willing to hear, their negotiations and just be like, we're going to meet somewhere where it makes sense for both of us. So that's another thing where it's like every artist and every person is kind of different. Like the scenarios are different. I think just me trying to build that structure now helps a lot because when I first started out, I was just trying to get with placements with anyone. I still didn't know about any of the publishing or anything like that at the time. I was just happy to have songs with people. So now it's kind of where, my catalog is starting to build and I understand the importance of, being tied to those songs, you know what I mean? And being able to have people get on streaming and see my name under the credits and things like that, which is super, super vital to building yourself up as a producer or as an artist. So that's kind of where I'm at now is just, it's still on a case by case basis, but we always try to get to a point where myself and the artist feel good about where we're at. Um, and definitely never aim to give up all my rights. Definitely, that's for sure. Like I've always heard the saying that 10% of something is better than no percent of nothing. You know what I mean? So it's like just trying to get to those points with every artist I work with. And that always starts with working with the right people too, that also have that understanding. Because if you're working with someone who doesn't get those things, it might be a lot more difficult to even try to explain it to them. And you also run the risk of getting like stiffed or just getting nothing at all. So kind of got to vet people and understand who you're working with too. And that just starts with building the relationships from the beginning. So I think it's cool because I'm starting to get in a spot where everyone I'm working with is just such a cool person. And I think we all have that like mutual respect and understanding for how we want to give credit to one another and just move it forward and still put out great material at the same time. So just keep it that balance with everyone, and that's really just where I'm at now.
That's great. I will admit that I have not always been very good about getting all of the paperwork that I should
Hmm.
have before a recording session, but I know a lot more about the business now than I used to. And artists and musicians, this is from a place of love and kindness. You want to stay friends with your engineers and producers, and the best way to do that is to talk about the legal stuff up front, get it in writing, nobody gets hurt. Because if perchance something crazy happens and one of the things you worked on blows up in a way that nobody imagines and there becomes real money at stake, you're going to wish that you had something in
Hmm.
writing because people are going to fight if it's not written down, and you don't want that. Again,
Yeah.
none of us are in this for the money. Obviously, we do this because we love it. And when you're an independent musician, there's clearly not a lot of money in it. So if we were in it for the money, we would have quit a long time ago. But from a just in case, getting all your bases covered standpoint, take care of that stuff. And it also makes you look professional, and it also
Hmm.
makes it more likely that people like Anthony are going to be willing to work with you. Um, Also, I do have a small pet peeve about I'm not going to name the name, but my particular distributor that I use to upload my music to streaming does not give any place to list the musicians and the producers on the songs. Some of the distributors do. So when you go to Spotify, you can see all the people that played it. You can see the producers, all that stuff. But mine doesn't. So I would like them to. If anyone has the ear of all the distributors, make sure that they can do that, because the people that work on our records deserve credit. Now, as an old guy, I make line. I mean, I still print CDs and all that stuff's in the liner notes. So, and it's on my website. You can find it, but it should be on the streaming services too, right?
I was gonna say everybody kind of has to get in the modern day. I think they're kind of behind on that. You know what I mean? They got to get it to where you can type everything in and just have it ready when songs come out. But
It's probably a software backend thing, but
hmm,
and I know that it costs money to go edit your software backend. Sure, it does, but this is something that I believe they should do. All right, that rant over. Let's go to your podcasting life. So 3 years of the podcast. Give me the name again, and what are you trying to accomplish on your podcast?
Yeah. So the name is called the Proven Knowledge Podcast. And it's really just a place where it's mostly independent artists or people that are just starting out. So it's kind of a place where artists can go share their stories, and then the audience, who is primarily also the same, independent artists, producers, people just getting started out, they can hear, stories from others and kind of apply it to their own situation. So it's really just about that. I've had bigger names on there before as well. But for the most part, I think the best conversations are with kind of my like-minded peers and collaborators and people that I share that mutual interest with. So we have great conversations, and then people can discover other artists through that and hopefully work with them. I've had people reach out and say, I heard so and so on this episode of the podcast, and now we're working together because I heard them on the podcast. So I'm like, that's kind of what the whole purpose was to begin with. You know what I mean? And just kind of connect people indirectly in that way. And then also hopefully give them some advice and some tips that they can use in their own career and in their own journey. So that's really what the purpose of it is. And it's been super organic and just super fun to be able to talk with people every week. And for me, it's like kind of like therapy in a way. I get to talk to different artists, and when I hear their struggles, I'm like, oh, I'm going through the same thing. Thank God, because I'm not the only one. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I think we feel, kind of alone in the journey sometimes, where you're going through these tough times and you're like, no one relates to what this is. And then you talk to these people and you understand it's like, okay, this is very common. It's just, I'm not surrounded by a lot of people like this. It's just, you got to find your people. So for me, that's really what it's been, and it's been super, super fulfilling, to say the least.
That's awesome. And you mentioned that you're in the 160s as far as your episode count.
Yeah, we're gonna be recording 163 tomorrow, I believe, and 157 comes out tomorrow. So I'm a bit
Excellent.
ahead on the schedule. So
I used to try to do that, and I'm not as good as it as I would like to be. So I commend you on being super organized and being able to do that.
I appreciate it.
Now is the time for the two questions that I ask everyone. First, and I love asking this one to musicians. Think back as far as you can, earliest point of your life that you can. What's the first song you could ever remember hearing?
Oh, first song I could ever remember hearing. Um, hmm. It was probably like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star from like my mom or something. If
Also
I had to
known
be
as the alphabet song.
I
Same
was
same
gonna say,
melody.
yeah, it's the same melody. That's probably the first one that's like, as far as like when I was literally just born or something. That's probably the earliest one. So 'cause she used to sing that like every night to me. So
I like that. Next one. What did your childhood smell like?
what did it smell like?
What did it smell like?
Huh? Probably dirt, Capri Sun, and fish.
You're gonna have to elaborate. See, I like
Okay.
this question because it means we get stories.
Um, Dirt probably because I used to ride my bike in the driveway all the time, and our driveway is literally like dirt and like gravel driveway. I used to like fall, mess my knees up, and all kinds of stuff. I used to play outside all the time as a kid. Um, and the thing is, when you're in Ohio, you only get a few months of summer, so I would be out like every day, either playing basketball or, like I said, riding the bike, doing whatever.
But when you're in Ohio, sometimes it's it can be 40 in
Yeah,
November, and as long as it's not raining, you can go play basketball on a 40-degree day.
that's true. I love the summer though. The summer is my thing, so I'll stick to the 70s and 80s for sure. Um, Capri Sun, I don't know. I think of like elementary school. We used to get like juice and stuff. Like we used to have the ice cream truck come and stuff. I just remember like things like that, like recess, hanging with my friends and stuff. Fish is I used to go fishing with my granddad a lot because my grandparents lived on the lake. So like every summer I would go and fish with me and my brother. We'd go out on the boat. So those are always like good memories for sure. I remember catching like a carp that was like bigger than my head one day. My grandma like took a photo of me with this giant fish. So fishing is was definitely something that always reminds me of being a kid for sure. So,
That's cool. Did you learn how to process the fish, like take the scales and the stuff out of it?
oh, see, we always threw them back. So
Oh, you
yeah,
didn't actually eat the fish.
we didn't eat the fish. We always threw them back. But it was definitely a lot of fun just to be able to do it like with my granddad and stuff. So the memories are really good.
It's something I forgot to ask you earlier. What are some of your musical influences? Like, what are the things that, as you obviously, when we make music, we are the sum of everything we've heard before, right? So, what
Hmm.
are some of the things that influence the way that you approach making music today?
Do we mean as far as just artists in general or genres, or would it
However,
be?
you wish to define that for yourself.
Yeah, okay. So I could definitely name like a lot of artists and producers, but I think it's really just um I'll kind of lean more in towards genre. So I'd say around like 9 or 10 is when I started getting into hip hop more primarily, just because I grew up listening to mostly like country and rock from like my parents. So like no one in my family was a hip hop head or anything like that. So I kind of just gravitated towards that. And I just started hearing things like on video games. Like I had a game called NBA Live '07, and they had a lot of hip hop artists on there. They had like Lupe Fiasco, Talib Kweli, a bunch of other people. So I just remember hearing those sounds, and I was like, "This is very cool." Eventually got my own iPod, and just started downloading different songs from artists I heard on the radio, and it was always just like gravitating towards sounds that I enjoyed or just made me like move or whatever. So I think that's just kind of where it went. And then by the time I got to middle school, I just started like I would download Pandora Radio, and I would just go through the artist channels and discover a lot of old music or a lot of music that was just coming out. Um, and that's kind of how I like developed my taste all the way up until high school, which is when I found out about music production. And then I started studying producers and, how do you make music? How do you do all this stuff? And then until getting out of high school. Then I started making music. So it's like one thing kind of led to another. I think that's kind of still how it is. And I think that's really how, everyone's musical journey is. Even if they don't play music their whole life, it's like you're always going to be a fan. So it starts out, you're a fan first, and then you just kind of gravitate towards saying, I want to do this myself. That's really how it's been for me. And it's still that way today. I guess I just kind of like what I like. I think my, musical horizon has expanded a lot. I like a lot more artists now and a lot more different genres. And being a producer, you kind of have to an extent. You kind of gotta, your palette has to be pretty much broadened to a lot of different tastes. So I think it's cool where I'm at now compared to where I was back then, only listening to like two or three artists. Um, but it's just that evolution over time. So
Who inspires you these days? Like, let's say we finish talking and you're going to go listen to someone that's not you and not one of the many artists you've worked with. What are some of the artists that do you want to see what they've been up to recently?
yeah. I've been listening to all kinds of different artists recently. In hip hop, I listened to local rappers named Stally. He's from Massillon. He's a much bigger artist now than he was back in the day. Rocky Fresh, Casey Veggies, listen to them every day. Um, In R&B, I listen to Alina Barrage. She's actually from Cleveland. I listen to Ombre, Beta, Aaron Ray, a lot of younger artists. I like where R&B is at now, where there's a lot of different styles and different people coming out of the woodwork, kind of doing their own thing, and even people that produce and they're also artists as well. Um, and I think with hip hop, I like what you said earlier about how, you're a big fan of the old school stuff. I think there is younger guys that are doing cool things. I think it's just about like they're not getting the shine really, or they might be harder to find. But I still think there is some cool MCs doing really, really cool stuff, even if they're in their 20s or 30s, because they were inspired by the older generation and they kind of are doing it in their own way. Um, but yeah, that's kind of some of the artists I've been listening to recently, or just people that are always in my rotation. So,
And last, where can we send the listeners to go learn more about you or follow you on social?
so I'm definitely most active on Instagram. So currently at Anthony underscore church 24. Um, Twitter is at ant underscore church 24. I'm not really on Twitter that much, so I'd say Instagram. If you definitely want to reach out to me, because my email's there and you could send a DM, you could send whatever you want. And that's where I post most of my content as well. I usually post one, piece of content every single day to Instagram. So you'll be able to see all the new music coming out, giveaways, podcast every Tuesday, all kinds of cool stuff, and just trying to come up with more ideas to, reach different people. So if you want to tap in, definitely follow me there and feel free to reach out.
Excellent. It seems you have a really good handle on how to work the business and marketing side. They always tell us post something every day, and a lot of us don't, but it's you totally do. So way to lead by example.
I was gonna say I keep that posting schedule now. I try to keep on it. I'm 6 months ahead right now on the posting
Nice.
schedule. So
Yeah, you should definitely pat
yeah,
yourself on the back for that. Well, Anthony, thank you very much for taking your time. I know you're a busy fella. This was really cool. I hope that someday I get a chance to go talk to you on your podcast, and you can put me in the answering questions hot seat.
yeah,
And
man.
yeah, here's hoping we live in the same state, so maybe someday we'll run into each other face to face out there.
I was gonna say I think Mariah J, who I've had on my
I
show a
do.
couple times. So in the Dayton area. So and I'm definitely down to have you on my show as well. I definitely want to make that happen very soon. And I just appreciate you for being genuine, for even getting back to me in the first place and giving me this opportunity. So thank you again and keep doing your thing, man, because I think what you're doing is awesome.
Thanks.
So
And I'm like you. Musicians are my people. And
mhm.
look, if we were like hanging out at a show, having a beer, this is the kind of stuff we talk about, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of I kind of want the podcast to feel like musicians hanging out, having a
yeah.
beer, even if we're not.
Absolutely, man. And it definitely feels that way. So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much to Anthony Church, not only for having this conversation with me back in June 2023, but also for his patience in waiting for me to get this thing posted on my podcast. Since then, I've been a guest on Anthony's Proven Knowledge podcast. Go listen to that episode maybe, and also, subscribe to the Proven Knowledge podcast. It's a good time. Also, dear listeners of the You Could Be My Aramis podcast, thank you for being here. Wherever you listen to podcasts, if you would subscribe or like, I'd appreciate that. And the reason you should subscribe, because more are coming. I promise. New episodes coming soon.